So Dave, what's been happening?
What's been happening in general?
Yeah.
You've probably heard a lot of that from Emma and Martin and Anthony. But for me, what's been happening is that we've spent the pretty much the first week just prospecting around camp, seeing what's about. There's a big section down a huge river valley where the rocks are nicely preserved. They're not too weathered, but access has been really, really hard. So we've been mostly trying to find ways to get into the river valley safely. Even the safest routes have involved us walking through snow, hell of a lot of snow, and also scrambling down scree slopes, crossing rivers in waders and stuff like that. So things like waders do weigh a lot. Snow is hard to walk over, especially when you got waders in your bag. So it's been pretty hard on the legs. But then once we're down there, we've had some pretty decent success, as far as I've been told, in finding the fossils. They're mostly tiny, tiny little fragmentary things. Like, until you get your eye into what you're looking for, it's really actually hard to even recognize these things as fossils. Like, you would look at them and think that they're just like a tiny little grain of rock or something. They've just got a different texture, and it's hard to think that these little scales were actually part of a much larger fish that had all of these bony plates on the outside of its head, pretty much. But then some of the other things that we found, like when you eventually get a jaw and it's got teeth in it, then that's been really good, and it's a lot more visually recognizable as a macrofossil. And then things like the acanthodian spines that they have in their fins, so these huge serrated spine things, they're really nice. So lots of walking, not very much sleeping, and generally being a bit cold and running out of chocolate.
So you've been brought along as the invert guy. What
Yeah.
invertebrates have you been finding?
There's been a whole lot of invertebrates. Like, invertebrates is quite a large group. I wouldn't say that I'm the invertebrate guy, representing what, like 99% of life on Earth. So I'm the arthropod guy, and we found no arthropods. Well, we found ostracods. That's not true, and a trilobite. So
And how big was your
So you're full of it, Dave.
okay, the ostracod was giant. Like, it was
Dave got very
huge.
excited.
I didn't really recognize it as an ostracod at first. So these are pistachio-shaped bivalved crustaceans. So they have this like pistachio outline to them. They've got two shells, and then they have all the little legs dangling out from there. If you're not yet listened to the ostracod episode of Paleocast, you need to do it. I'll get that in there. But yeah, I found an ostracod, and these are normally really, really tiny. We're not even talking like a grain of rice in size, but this thing was so large that I didn't even recognize it as an ostracod at first. It was about the size of an M&M or a Smartie or something. And I think that it may be possible to identify it, but I didn't really read around didn't really read beyond the Eurypterids and the different like larger arthropods that we'd be getting here. So I didn't look into the ostracods, or I didn't look into the trilobites or anything, because we found one of those as well. Anyway, so those two arthropods that we have found, I do think that we'll be able to get some kind of identification for them, but it's nothing that I'm able to do here in the field now. So the worry for me is that we're finding things like ostracods, and yet I'm unable to really appreciate what they are, or understand like if there is any significance to them. Maybe this is a new species or a new genus, family even. Like, who knows how many different ostracod workers have been out here in the Arctic, and how many trilobite workers. So I am a little bit worried that I have this treasure trove of arthropod diversity that I'm just not able to appreciate. But then, on the other hand, there's like 20,000 species of trilobites. So I really can't be expected to stay on top of all that stuff. So, I mean, for me, just being able to recognise and appreciate the Eurypterids is enough for me, I think, academically. So
have you found the Eurypterids yet?
No, we've not been in the right rocks really for me to find Eurypterids. So they're really funny with the preservation. So anytime you find a Eurypterid, you're pretty much looking at a Lagerstätte, which is a site of special preservation or concentration. But yeah, so it would normally have to be a really gross, smelly, old, stagnant estuary, lake, lagoon type thing to get this preservation of these arthropods, which don't have a mineralized skeleton. So things like trilobites have calcium carbonate in their exoskeleton, makes them easier to preserve, whereas things like Eurypterids just tend to decay away very easily. And so we've not really been looking at the right kinds of rocks to find them, but hopefully in the coming weeks, if Martin will let me, we'll go out and see if we can actually find some, because they have been reported from this island, and we can see the rocks from where we are. Every day we go out digging for these tiny fish that I can't even see hardly, and yet I know that just on the horizon we've got all of these cliffs lit up always by the most beautiful, glorious sunlight. It's by the most beautiful bay you've ever seen in your life. There's loads of sea ice. It's something you'd expect to see on like a postcard of the Arctic. But yeah, so we've got 1.5 meter long, the rarest of rare Eurypterids in those cliffs, and yet we can't get to them, or we've not even tried. But there would likely be two giant rivers in the way, and we don't have a boat, so even though we're like 2.5 kilometers away from those cliffs, I mean, we could, you know, just be back in the UK in terms of accessibility, which is a real shame. But hopefully by the time we move for the next camp, so this is just one of two here, we should be in a position where we can find some, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Cool. And lastly, what did you expect life would be like in the Arctic, and how is it different from that?
Life in the Arctic I expected to be very cold, which it is, and very windy, which it also is. But some of the things that I didn't expect is the condensation. The amount of that, it's been a nightmare. The first night I had in my tent, I had all of the air vents shut because, you know, it's a tent, you're not meant to have holes all over it. And I basically drowned myself with my own breath. It just condensed on all of the tent and dripped down everywhere. And even in this tent right now, the walls behind me are all soaking wet and dripping. So that was a real surprise. And even something like having a balaclava, for instance, if you've just got it on and it's over your mouth. Yeah, that's going to look good on camera. If it's over your mouth like this, in 5 minutes it's absolutely soaking wet, and your nose is constantly dripping from the condensation of when you're breathing out. It was a real surprise to have so much of that, and it's a real pain to deal with all the time. And of course, if you're breathing out so much moisture, you got to keep drinking, and trying to stay on top of my fluid intake is a real big challenge as well.
Cool. So also, how have you found the elements for daily life, like pooping?
Going to the toilet.
Yes.
Okay, going to the toilet, because someone's going to have to address this, and I'm the only one left who's not done it, is a problem. It's less of a problem for a guy, I expect, but still you've got to be really mindful about which direction you pee, because there's such high wind. You would be used to it falling near your feet, but instead, you know, you're like 2 meters either side of you, and then, yeah, Thank you. And when you go to the toilet at any time, you need to be taking a gun with you, because if a bear is to come up and see you in a compromised position, then that's something you've got to be aware of, and aware of your surroundings in general. And so you're going with a spade, you're going with the toilet paper, you're going with a gun. So there's a whole ritual around even just going to the toilet, and it's a hike as well, because we don't want to leave anything that may attract wildlife to where we're living, where we're cooking, where we're sleeping, and these places where we want to be keeping bears and stuff away from. So we're like off on a hike just to even go to the toilet. We've got to go like for a 10-minute walk or something.